The scream that tore across the Nebraska prairie in the summer of 1876 was unlike anything Jake Morrison had ever heard, and he had heard plenty in his 26 years riding the wild country between Omaha and the Sandhills. He reined in his bay gelding so hard the animal nearly sat back on its haunches, his hand instinctively moving to the colt at his hip before his mind caught up with what his ears were telling him. That was not the cry of someone being attacked by bandits or Indians. That was the sound of a woman in agony, and it was coming from somewhere beyond the ridge to his east. Jake spurred his horse forward, his saddlebags bouncing against the animal's flanks as they crested the small rise. What he saw in the shallow draw below made his blood run cold. A covered wagon sat at an angle, one wheel clearly broken, and beside it on a blanket lay a woman, her dark hair plastered to her face with sweat, her body convulsing with another contraction that brought forth another of those bone-chilling screams. There was no one else in sight, no husband, no traveling companions, no other wagons, just this woman alone on the endless grass, and she was clearly in labor. "Holy hell," Jake breathed, urging his horse down the slope. He had helped birth calves and foals more times than he could count, but a human baby was something else entirely. Still, he could not just ride away and leave her here to face this alone. As he drew closer, he could see she was young, maybe 22 or 23, with a face that would have been pretty if it were not contorted in pain. Her dress was soaked through with sweat, and her hands clutched at the blanket beneath her. "Ma'am," Jake called out as he dismounted, ground-tying his horse a respectful distance away. "Ma'am, I am here to help. My name is Jake Morrison." The woman's eyes flew open, wild with pain and fear. For a moment she looked like she might try to crawl away from him, but then another contraction seized her and she could only gasp and bear down, her face going red with the effort. When it passed, she collapsed back against the blanket, panting. "Please," she managed to gasp out. "Please, the baby is coming. My husband, he went for help. The wagon broke. He has been gone since yesterday morning. I think he got lost or something happened. The baby was not supposed to come for another month." Jake felt his stomach drop. A month early, that was not good. He moved closer, kneeling beside her and trying to keep his expression calm, even though his heart was hammering in his chest. "What is your name, ma'am?" "Sarah," she gasped. "Sarah Fletcher. We were heading to North Platte. Oh God, here comes another one." Jake had never felt so helpless in his life as he watched Sarah's body arch with the force of the contraction. He knew enough about birthing to understand that this baby was coming whether anyone was ready or not. And if he did not help her, both she and the child might die out here in the middle of nowhere. He took a deep breath and made himself think practically. "Sarah, listen to me," he said, his voice steady despite his racing thoughts. "I have helped birth animals before. I know it is not the same, but I am not going to let you go through this alone. Do you understand? I am going to help you." Sarah's eyes met his, and he saw both terror and desperate hope in their blue depths. She nodded, unable to speak, as the contraction continued to grip her. Jake quickly moved to his horse and pulled his bedroll and canteen from behind the saddle. He had a clean shirt in his saddlebag that he could use for the baby, and he thanked God that he had filled his canteen at the creek just that morning. When he returned to Sarah's side, she was gasping for breath, tears streaming down her face. "I am so scared," she whispered. "What if something is wrong? What if the baby does not survive because it is too early?" "We are not going to think like that," Jake said firmly, though the same fears were running through his own mind. "We are going to bring this baby into the world, and you are going to be fine, and the baby is going to be fine. Now I need to see how far along you are. I apologize for the lack of modesty, but there is no help for it." Sarah nodded, biting her lip. Jake carefully lifted her skirts, trying to maintain what dignity he could for her in this impossible situation. What he saw made his breath catch. He could already see the crown of the baby's head. This child was coming fast. "Sarah, the baby is right there," he told her. "On the next contraction, you are going to need to push as hard as you can. Can you do that?" "I do not know," she sobbed. "I am so tired. I have been laboring since last night." "I know you are tired, but your baby needs you to be strong just a little while longer," Jake said, taking her hand in his. His hand was calloused and rough from years of ranch work, but he held hers as gently as he would hold a newborn calf. "You can do this, Sarah. I know you can." Another contraction built, and Sarah squeezed his hand so hard he thought she might break bones. She bore down with a guttural cry that seemed to come from the very center of her being, and Jake watched in awe as more of the baby's head emerged. The tiny face was purple and scrunched, but it was the most miraculous thing he had ever seen. "That is it," he encouraged. "You're doing so well. One more like that and the head will be out." Sarah collapsed back, gasping. "I cannot," she whimpered. "I cannot do it." "Yes, you can," Jake insisted. "Look at me, Sarah. Look at me." Her exhausted eyes met his, and he held her gaze steadily. "You are the strongest woman I have ever met. You have been out here alone, facing this without help until now, and you have not given up. Your baby is almost here. Just a little more." Something in his words or his eyes seemed to give her strength. When the next contraction came, she pushed with everything she had left, and suddenly the baby's head was out, rotating slightly just like Jake had seen calf heads do. He supported the tiny skull carefully with his hands, marveling at how impossibly small and fragile it felt. "The head is out," he told Sarah. "Just one more big push for the shoulders." Sarah gathered herself for one final effort. When the contraction came, she pushed, and Jake gently guided the baby's shoulders out, first one and then the other, and then suddenly the entire tiny body slipped into his waiting hands. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The baby was so small, smaller than any newborn Jake had ever seen, and it was not crying. Its skin had a bluish tinge that terrified him. "Why is the baby not crying?" Sarah asked, trying to lift her head to see. "Is my baby alive?" Jake acted on instinct. He turned the baby over and rubbed its back vigorously, trying to stimulate it to breathe. Nothing. He rubbed harder, and then he remembered something his mother had told him once about his own difficult birth. He put his mouth near the baby's nose and mouth and gave a gentle puff of air, then rubbed the back again. The baby gave a spluttering cough, and then a weak cry that grew stronger. The bluish tinge began to fade to pink, and Jake felt tears spring to his eyes as he realized he was holding a living, breathing human being that had been on the edge of death just moments before. "Your baby is fine," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You have a son, Sarah, a beautiful baby boy." Sarah burst into tears, holding out her arms, and Jake carefully placed the still wet infant on her chest. The baby's cries had settled to small, mewling sounds, and Sarah held him close, crying and laughing at the same time. Jake used his knife to cut a length of leather from his saddlebag, tying off the cord in 2 places before cutting between them the way he had seen done with livestock. It was crude, but it would work. He covered Sarah and the baby with his bedroll, knowing that keeping them warm was important, especially given how small the baby was. Then he sat back on his heels, suddenly aware that his hands were shaking and his shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cooling evening air. He had just helped deliver a human baby. On the open prairie, with no training and no help, and somehow miraculously, both mother and child appeared to be alive and relatively well. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, looking up at him with tears still streaming down her face. "Thank you. You saved our lives. Both of us." Jake shook his head, still trying to process what had just happened. "You did all the hard work," he said. "I just caught him." Sarah laughed weakly at that, then winced. "I think there is more to come," she said, and Jake realized she meant the afterbirth. He helped her through that as well, though he turned his face away to give her what privacy he could. When it was done, he He buried it a distance away and then used water from his canteen to help her clean up as best he could, again trying to maintain her modesty as much as possible under the circumstances. By the time he had her settled somewhat comfortably with the baby nursing at her breast, the sun was starting to set, painting the prairie sky in shades of orange and gold. Jake built a fire and made camp, his mind racing. Sarah needed proper medical care, and so did the baby. The little boy was so small, hardly bigger than Jake's forearm, and he could see every tiny rib beneath the translucent skin, but he was alive, and he was trying to nurse, which Jake took as a good sign. "I should go look for your husband," Jake said as he settled beside the fire with a tin cup of coffee. He had given Sarah water, but he did not think coffee was good for a nursing mother, though he could not have said why he thought that. Sarah's expression grew troubled. "Robert went west, toward where we thought North Platte should be," she said, "but we had already gotten off course somehow. I think we were too far north. He left at dawn yesterday, and he said he would be back by noon at the latest with help, or at least with directions. When he did not come back, I thought maybe he had gotten lost or hurt, and then the pain started, and they just kept getting worse and worse." Jake frowned, doing calculations in his head. "By my reckoning, we're about 30 miles north of where you wanted to be," he said. "If he went west from here, he could have walked all day and not hit anything but empty prairie. There are no towns that direction for a long way. North Platte is southwest of here, not west." "Oh no," Sarah breathed, clutching her baby closer. "What if he is lost out there? What if something happened to him?" "I will look for him in the morning," Jake promised. "But right now, my priority is making sure you and this little one are safe and warm and fed." "Do you have provisions in the wagon?" Sarah nodded. "Some. We were running low. That is why we were pushing to reach North Platte." Jake investigated the wagon and found a small amount of flour, some beans, a little salt pork, and not much else. It would have to do. He made a simple meal of beans and salt pork, which Sarah ate ravenously, and then he made sure she drank plenty of water. His mother had always said that nursing mothers needed to drink water constantly, and he figured his mother had known what she was talking about. As the stars came out, brilliant and countless in the clear prairie sky, Jake sat by the fire and watched Sarah sleep with her baby cradled in her arms. The little boy had nursed and then fallen asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Jake found himself unable to look away. There was something about seeing this small, perfect life, knowing that he had helped bring it into the world, that made him feel changed somehow. Like the man who had ridden up to this wagon this afternoon was not quite the same man sitting here now. He had been drifting for the past 3 years, taking ranch work where he could find it, never staying in one place long. After his parents had died of fever and the family ranch in Kansas had been sold to pay debts, he had not seen the point in putting down roots anywhere. He had convinced himself he preferred the freedom of the open range, answering to no one, responsible for no one. But sitting here now, watching over this woman and child who had stumbled into his path by chance or fate or whatever you wanted to call it, he felt something stirring in his chest that he had not felt in a long time. Purpose. The sense that maybe he was meant to be here, in this place at this moment. The night grew cool, and Jake added more wood to the fire. He wrapped himself in his coat and leaned back against his saddle, his rifle across his lap in case of wolves or other dangers. He dozed fitfully, waking at every sound, checking constantly to make sure Sarah and the baby were still breathing, still safe. When dawn broke across the prairie, painting the grass gold and the sky pink, Jake was already up, making coffee and planning his day. Sarah woke slowly, looking disoriented for a moment before her eyes found her baby, and she smiled. The little boy was awake as well, his dark blue eyes seeming to look around even though Jake knew newborns could not see much. "How are you feeling?" Jake asked, bringing her water and some of the hardtack he had found in the wagon, softened in warm water to make it easier to eat. "Sore," Sarah admitted. But better than I would have thought. The baby nursed twice in the night. He's so small, Jake, so very small. He is a fighter, Jake said, just like his mother. What are you going to name him? Sarah looked down at her son, her expression tender. I do not know, she said softly. Robert and I had picked out names, but now I'm not sure. Those names were for a different baby, one born in a proper bed with a doctor attending. This little one fought his way into the world with just me and a cowboy who happened to be riding by. He deserves a name that means something. That is a heavy burden for a name, Jake said with a slight smile. Sarah smiled back, and Jake noticed that even exhausted and disheveled, with her hair tangled and her dress stained, she was lovely. There was a strength in her face, in the set of her jaw, and the clarity of her blue eyes that drew him. He pushed the thought away. This woman was married, and she had just given birth, and he had no business thinking of her as anything other than someone who needed his help. I am going to scout around, see if I can find any sign of your husband, Jake said, standing and brushing off his pants. I will not go far. If you need me, fire 3 shots and I will come running. Can you shoot? Sarah nodded. Robert taught me the rifle is in the wagon. Jake helped her get the rifle and made sure it was loaded and within easy reach. Then he saddled his horse and began to ride in widening circles around the camp, looking for any sign of a man on foot. He found tracks leading west from the wagon just as Sarah had said, but they disappeared in the harder ground about a mile out. He followed the direction they had been heading for another hour, but saw nothing. No body, no sign of injury, nothing. It was as if Robert Fletcher had simply walked off into the empty prairie and vanished. Jake felt a growing unease as he turned his horse back toward camp. A man did not just disappear, not without a trace. Either Robert had gotten hopelessly lost and was still wandering out there somewhere, or something had happened to him. Neither option was good, and both left Sarah in a terrible position. When he returned to camp, he found Sarah sitting up, the baby at her breast again. She looked up hopefully when she saw him, but the expression faded when she read his face. You did not find him, she said, her voice flat. I found his tracks heading west, but they disappeared, Jake admitted. I am sorry, Sarah. I could keep looking, but the truth is that this prairie is vast, and if he is lost out there, it could take days or weeks to find him. And you and the baby need proper care soon. That little one is too small and too early. He needs a doctor to look at him, and you need rest and good food and a roof over your head. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. What do I do? She whispered. I cannot just leave Robert out there. But you are right, the baby needs help. What do I do? Jake knelt beside her, his heart aching at the impossible choice she faced. I think we need to get you to North Platte, he said gently. Once you're safe and the baby has been seen by a doctor, I can come back and search for Robert properly. I can bring men with me and we can cover more ground. But right now, you and your son have to be the priority. Sarah nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. You are right, she said. I know you are right. It is just so hard. Yesterday morning, Robert was here, and we were planning our new life in North Platte, and now everything has fallen apart. Not everything, Jake said, nodding at the baby in her arms. You have your son, and I promise you, I will do everything I can to find Robert. The journey to North Platte took 2 days, and they were 2 of the hardest days of Jake's life. Sarah could not walk, not so soon after giving birth, and the broken wagon was useless. Jake fashioned a travois from branches and rope, attaching it to his horse, and made Sarah as comfortable as possible on it with all the blankets and cushions he could find. The baby rode in her arms, wrapped in Jake's spare shirt and the cleanest blanket from the wagon. They moved slowly, stopping frequently so Sarah could nurse the baby and rest. Jake walked beside his horse, unwilling to ride while Sarah was being dragged along on the travois. He shot a rabbit the first evening and made a stew that Sarah said was the best thing she had ever tasted, though Jake suspected that was just hunger talking. The second night, the baby cried more than he had before, a thin, mewling sound that worried both of them. He feels warm, Sarah said, her voice tight with fear. Jake, I think he has a fever. Jake touched the baby's forehead with the back of his hand and felt the unnatural heat there. His stomach clenched with fear. A fever in a newborn, especially one so premature, could be fatal. "We will push harder tomorrow," he said. "We should reach North Platte by afternoon if we start at first light." They barely slept that night, taking turns holding the baby and trying to keep him cool with damp cloths. By morning, the little boy seemed worse, his cries weaker, his skin hot and dry. Sarah was pale and drawn, and Jake knew she was in pain from the jostling of the travois, though she never complained. They reached North Platte just after noon, and Jake had never been so glad to see a town in his life. He headed straight for the doctor's office, a small building on a side street, and carried Sarah inside with the baby still in her arms. A gray-haired man looked up from his desk in surprise. "This woman gave birth 3 days ago on the prairie," Jake said without preamble. "The baby came a month early and now has a fever. They need help." The doctor, who introduced himself as Dr. Harrison, moved quickly. He examined Sarah first, declaring that she had done remarkably well considering the circumstances, though she needed rest and better nutrition. Then he turned his attention to the baby, and Jake saw his expression grow grave. "The child has an infection, doctor," Harrison said, "likely from the birthing process. It is common when babies are born in less than sterile conditions. I will do what I can, but I must be honest with you. Premature babies are fragile. An infection is often fatal. You should prepare yourselves." Sarah made a sound like a wounded animal, and Jake found himself moving to her side, taking her hand. "He is a fighter," Jake said firmly. "He has fought for every breath since he was born. Do not count him out yet." Dr. Harrison looked at Jake with something like approval. "You are right," he said. "We will fight for him. Now, young lady, you need to tell me everything about the birth so I can best care for your son." Sarah told the story, with Jake filling in details, and Dr. Harrison listened carefully. When they were done, he shook his head in wonder. "You did everything right," he told Jake. "If you had not been there, both of them would have died. You saved 2 lives that day." Jake felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what needed doing," he muttered. Dr. Harrison set Sarah and the baby up in a room behind his office, one he kept for patients who needed close monitoring. He gave the baby medicine for the fever and showed Sarah how to keep him cool with damp cloths. Then he turned to Jake. "The mother says her husband is missing on the prairie," Dr. Harrison said. "Is that correct?" Jake nodded and explained the situation. "Doctor." Harrison frowned. "I will put the word out," he said. "There are ranchers and cowboys who come through town regularly. Someone may have seen him. In the meantime, that young woman and her baby are going to need someone to look after them. She has no money for my services or for lodging once the baby is well enough to leave my care." "I will take care of it," Jake heard himself say. "Whatever she needs, I will pay for it." Dr. Harrison raised his eyebrows. "That is generous of you, given that you just met her." Jake did not have an explanation that made sense, so he just shrugged. "Like I said, I will do what needs doing." Over the next week, Jake found work at a nearby ranch, breaking horses and mending fences, anything to earn money to pay Sarah's bills. He visited the doctor's office every evening, bringing fresh milk and eggs and whatever else he could think of that might help Sarah regain her strength. The baby remained critically ill for 3 days, his tiny body burning with fever while Sarah held him and wept and prayed. Jake sat with them through those long nights, dozing in a chair, waking whenever the baby cried or Sarah needed something. On the 4th day, the fever broke. The baby's skin cooled, and he began to nurse more vigorously, his cries growing stronger. Dr. Harrison declared it a miracle, and Sarah held her son and sobbed with relief. Jake felt something loosen in his chest that he had not even realized was tight. The baby was going to live. "You need to give him a name," Jake said that evening, watching as Sarah nursed her son. "He has fought too hard to still be called the baby." Sarah looked up at Jake, her expression thoughtful. "I want to name him Jacob," she said softly, "after the man who saved his life." After you. Jake felt his throat tighten. Sarah, you do not have to do that. I want to, she insisted. Jacob Morrison Fletcher, if that is all right with you. Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He was honored and humbled and terrified all at once. This woman and her child had become important to him in a way he did not fully understand. He looked forward to his evening visits with an eagerness that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with the way Sarah smiled when she saw him, the way she shared stories of her childhood in Ohio, the way she laughed at his terrible jokes. He loved holding little Jacob, marveling at how the baby had grown stronger each day, how his tiny fingers would wrap around Jake's calloused thumb with surprising strength. But Sarah was a married woman, and Jake had to keep reminding himself of that fact. He had put the word out all over town about Robert Fletcher, and several ranchers had promised to keep an eye out. But as the days turned into 2 weeks with no sign of Sarah's husband, Jake began to wonder if Robert Fletcher was ever coming back. Sarah must have been thinking the same thing, because one evening when Jake arrived with a basket of food from the restaurant down the street, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. I do not think Robert is coming back, she said quietly. I think something terrible happened to him out there, and I am never going to know what. I am never going to be able to bury him or say goodbye or any of it. Jake sat down beside her, aching to take her in his arms, but knowing he could not. I am sorry, he said. I wish I had better words, but I am just sorry. What am I going to do? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. I have no money, no husband, a tiny baby who still needs so much care. I was supposed to be starting a new life in North Platte with Robert. He had a job waiting at the lumber mill. Now I have nothing. That is not true, Jake said firmly. You have your son. You have your strength. You have survived things that would have killed a weaker person. You will figure this out, Sarah, and you are not alone. I am here, and I will help you however I can. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and Jake saw something shift in her eyes. Why? She asked. Why have you done all this for us? You do not owe us anything. You could have ridden away that first day, and no one would have blamed you. Jake struggled to find the right words. Because when I heard you crying out there on the prairie, something in me changed, he said slowly. For 3 years I have been drifting, not caring about much of anything. Then I met you and Jacob, and suddenly I cared again. I cared whether you lived or died. I cared whether that baby took his first breath. And now I care what happens to both of you. I do not have a fancy explanation for it. It just is. Sarah reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and warm in his. I care about you too, she said softly. I know I should not. I know it has only been 2 weeks, and I'm supposed to be mourning my husband. But Robert and I, we barely knew each other. It was an arranged marriage of sorts. My parents thought he would be a good provider. And I wanted to get away from Ohio and see the West. We were trying to make it work, but there was no great love between us, not like in the stories. Jake's heart was pounding so hard he was sure Sarah must be able to hear it. What are you saying? He asked, hardly daring to breathe. I am saying that I think about you all day when you are not here, Sarah said, her cheeks flushing pink. I think about how gentle you were when you delivered Jacob, how you have taken care of us without asking for anything in return, how you make me laugh even when I am sad. I am saying that when I look at you, I feel something I never felt with Robert. I am saying that I know it is too soon and probably wrong, but I cannot help how I feel. Jake squeezed her hand, his mind racing. Everything he had been trying not to feel for the past 2 weeks came flooding through him. He was falling in love with Sarah Fletcher, had been falling in love with her since that first moment when she had looked at him with desperate hope in her eyes, but the shadow of her missing husband hung over them both. Sarah, I feel the same way, Jake admitted. But your husband has only been gone 2 weeks. We do not know for certain what happened to him. I do not want to dishonor him or you by rushing into something before we know. Sarah nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. You are right, she said. You are a good man, Jake Morrison, a better man than I deserve. That is not true, Jake said fiercely. "You deserve everything good in this world, Sarah, everything." They sat in silence for a long moment, hands clasped, both of them knowing that something had fundamentally changed between them, but not yet able to act on it. Finally, Jake cleared his throat and stood. "I should go," he said. "Dr. Harrison will be making his evening rounds soon, but I will be back tomorrow, like always." "Like always," Sarah agreed, and the smile she gave him was full of promise and hope and sadness all mixed together. The next few weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo. Sarah and baby Jacob grew stronger each day. Dr. Harrison finally declared them well enough to leave his care, and Jake found them a small room in a boarding house run by a kind widow named Mrs. Peterson. Jake paid the first month's rent and continued to bring food and supplies, but he was careful to always be proper, always be respectful, always leave before dark. Sarah found work taking in mending and sewing from some of the wealthier families in town. She was skilled with a needle, and word spread quickly. It was not much money, but combined with what Jake could provide without making Sarah feel like a charity case, it was enough to get by. Baby Jacob thrived, growing bigger and stronger, his eyes turning from dark blue to a lighter shade that reminded Jake of the summer sky. Jake continued to work at the ranch, but he found himself spending every spare moment in town. He would stop by Sarah's room on the pretense of checking on Jacob, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. Sarah told him about growing up the youngest of 5 daughters in Ohio, about her love of books and her dream of maybe one day opening a dress shop. Jake told her about his childhood on the Kansas ranch, about his parents and how much he missed them, about his years of drifting and how empty they had felt. Mrs. Peterson, who missed nothing, took to giving Jake knowing looks whenever he visited. "That is a good woman," she told him one day when he met her on the stairs, "and she is not really married anymore. Not in any way that matters. Robert Fletcher has been gone near on 2 months now with no word. Everyone in town agrees he is likely dead. There's no shame in moving on with life when there is no hope left." Jake appreciated her words, but he still hesitated. He did not want people to think poorly of Sarah, and he did not want to rush her into something she might regret. But it was getting harder and harder to deny what he felt. He was in love with her, deeply and completely, and he was fairly certain she felt the same way about him. The resolution came in an unexpected way. 2 months after Jake had found Sarah on the prairie, a rancher named Tom Sawyer rode into town and asked to speak with the sheriff. He had found remains on the far western edge of his property, and from the scraps of clothing and the papers in the saddlebag nearby, it appeared to be Robert Fletcher. The sheriff came to Sarah's boarding house with his hat in his hands and sympathy in his eyes. Jake was there visiting as he was most evenings, and he sat beside Sarah as the sheriff explained what they had found. It appeared that Robert had been bitten by a rattlesnake and had died from the venom. His body had been scavenged by animals, which was why there was so little left, but there was enough to make a positive identification. Sarah wept, and Jake held her while she cried, not for a great lost love, but for a life cut short, for the waste of it all, for the might-have-beens. When her tears finally slowed, she looked up at Jake with red-rimmed eyes. "I am sorry," she said. "I know I should feel more. I know I should be devastated, but mostly I just feel sad and guilty that I am not more sad." "You have nothing to feel guilty about," Jake said firmly. "You married him in good faith. You tried to build a life with him. The fact that you did not love him the way a wife should love a husband is not your fault. Sometimes these things just are not meant to be." The sheriff cleared his throat. "I will need you to come to my office tomorrow to make a formal statement and sign some papers," he said. "But after that you will be a widow in the eyes of the law. I am very sorry for your loss, Mrs. Fletcher." After the sheriff left, Sarah sat in silence for a long time, holding Jacob and staring at nothing. Jake stayed beside her, waiting for her to speak when she was ready. Finally, she turned to him. "I am free," she said, and there was wonder in her voice. "I know that sounds terrible, but I am free. I do not have to wonder anymore. I do not have to feel guilty about my feelings. I am free to choose my own path forward." "What path do you want to choose?" Jake asked. his heart in his throat. Sarah looked at him, and the love in her eyes was so clear and bright that it took his breath away. "I want to choose you," she said simply, "if you will have me. I want to choose a life with you, Jake Morrison. You have been more of a husband to me these past 2 months than Robert was in the months we were married. You delivered my son. You saved both our lives. You have taken care of us without asking for anything in return. I love you, and I think I have loved you since that first day when you looked at me and promised me that everything would be all right." Jake felt like his heart might burst. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have tried not to. I have tried to be respectful and proper and give you space. But I love you, Sarah. I love you and I love Jacob, and I want to spend the rest of my life taking care of both of you, if you will let me." "Yes," Sarah breathed, and then she was kissing him, or he was kissing her. Or maybe they were kissing each other and it did not matter because it was perfect. It was everything a first kiss should be, full of promise and hope and love. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling and crying at the same time. Jacob, as if sensing the importance of the moment, chose that time to wake up and start fussing, and they both laughed as Sarah moved to nurse him. "We should wait a respectful time before we marry," Sarah said as she settled Jacob at her breast. "I do not want people to think poorly of us or to gossip." "I do not care what people think," Jake said, "but if you want to wait, we will wait. I have waited this long. I can wait a little longer." They waited 3 months, long enough for the gossips to be satisfied that Sarah had mourned appropriately. In that time, Jake continued to work at the ranch and saved every penny he could. He had a plan forming, one he hoped Sarah would agree to. The ranch he worked for was looking to sell off a parcel of land on the eastern edge, near a creek with good water and grass. It was not much, maybe 160 acres, but it was enough to start a small operation. Jake could run some cattle, maybe breed horses. Sarah could have her dress shop in town, or she could work from home. They could build a life together, a real life, rooted in one place. When he proposed the idea to Sarah, her eyes lit up with excitement. "Our own land," she breathed. "Our own home." Jake, yes. 1,000 times yes. They were married on a bright October morning in 1876 in the small church in North Platte. Mrs. Peterson and Dr. Harrison stood as witnesses, and baby Jacob, now 4 months old and thriving, slept peacefully through the ceremony in Mrs. Peterson's arms. Sarah wore a dress she had made herself, a beautiful thing in pale blue that brought out her eyes, and Jake wore his best clothes, his hair slicked back and his boots polished. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Jake kissed Sarah with all the love and promise he felt in his heart, and the small gathering of friends they had made in North Platte cheered and clapped. It was not a grand society wedding, but it was perfect for them. They spent their wedding night in the boarding house room that had been Sarah's home for the past months, and for the first time they came together as husband and wife in every sense of the word. Jake was gentle and patient, aware that Sarah's only previous experience had been with a man she had not loved. He wanted to show her what it could be like when two people came together out of love and desire and deep affection. Sarah was shy at first, but as Jake kissed her and touched her and whispered how beautiful she was, she relaxed and responded with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally joined together, it felt like coming home, like two pieces of a puzzle finally fitting into place. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, listening to Jacob's soft breathing from his cradle in the corner, and Jake had never felt more content in his life. "I love you," Sarah whispered, her head on his chest. "I never knew it could be like this." "I love you too," Jake said, kissing the top of her head, "and it is only going to get better from here." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Jake completed the purchase of the land, and with help from some of the other ranchers he had befriended, he began to build a house. It was not large, just 3 rooms to start, but it was solid and well made with a good roof and a stone fireplace. Sarah helped when she could, taking time away from her sewing work to sandboards or mix mortar. Jacob strapped to her back in a sling Jake had fashioned from an old blanket. By the time winter set in, the house was complete enough to move into, and they spent their first Christmas as a family in their own home. Jake had bought a few head of cattle with the last of his savings, and he had plans to buy more in the spring. Sarah had set up a small workroom where she could do her sewing, and orders were coming in steadily from town. Money was tight, but they had enough. And more importantly, they had each other. Jacob was growing like a weed, and the fears about him being premature had proven unfounded. He was a healthy, happy baby who smiled easily and rarely cried. Jake loved coming home from working the land to find Sarah and Jacob waiting for him, loved the way Jacob's face would light up when he saw Jake, loved the way the baby would reach for him with chubby arms. "He thinks you are his father," Sarah said one evening as they sat by the fire, Jacob playing on a blanket at their feet. "He has never known anyone else." "I am his father," Jake said firmly, "in every way that matters. I was there when he was born. I helped bring him into this world. I have loved him since his first breath. Biology does not make a father. Love does." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You are a good man, Jake Morrison," she said, leaning over to kiss him. "The best man I have ever known." As winter gave way to spring, their life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jake worked the land, building up their herd slowly but surely. Sarah's sewing business grew, and she was even commissioned to make a wedding dress for the daughter of one of the wealthier families in North Platte. The money from that job allowed them to buy more supplies and a milk cow, and suddenly their little homestead felt like it was really thriving. In May of 1877, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. She told Jake one evening after they had put Jacob to bed, her face glowing with happiness and a little bit of nervousness. "Another baby," Jake breathed, pulling her into his arms. "Sarah, that is wonderful news." "I am a little scared," she admitted. "After what happened with Jacob, I cannot help but worry." "This time will be different," Jake promised. "This time you will have a proper bed and a doctor nearby and a husband who will be right there with you every step of the way. And this baby will come right on time, full term and healthy. You will see." Jake's predictions proved correct. In January of 1878, Sarah gave birth to a baby girl in their bedroom, with Dr. Harrison in attendance and Jake holding her hand. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when the baby finally arrived, she was pink and healthy and screaming at the top of her lungs. "She has spirit, doctor," Harrison said with a laugh as he handed the baby to Sarah. "This one is going to keep you on your toes." They named her Emma Rose Morrison, and she was indeed spirited. Where Jacob had been a calm, easy baby, Emma was demanding and loud and full of personality from the start. Jake adored her instantly. He loved her dark hair that was so like Sarah's, loved her tiny fingers and toes, loved the way she would stare at him with serious eyes as if she were judging his worthiness as a father. Jacob, now a year and a half old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, patting her gently and singing nonsense songs in his toddler voice. Sarah would watch them together and marvel at how much her life had changed in the space of less than 2 years. She had gone from being a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, lost on the prairie and about to die in childbirth, to being the wife of a man she loved deeply and the mother of 2 beautiful children. Sometimes it felt like a dream. As the years passed, their little ranch grew and prospered. Jake proved to be a skilled cattleman and an even better horse breeder. His reputation for honesty and hard work spread, and soon he had more business than he could handle. They hired a hand to help with the daily work, a young man named Thomas who was trying to save money to start his own place. Sarah's sewing business became too much to run from home, and in 1880 she finally opened the dress shop she had always dreamed of in North Platte. She hired 2 young women to help with the work, and soon her shop was the most popular place in town for anyone who wanted quality clothing. She was particularly known for her wedding dresses, and women would come from as far as Omaha to have Sarah Fletcher Morrison create their special day gown. Jacob started school in 1881, and Jake and Sarah marveled at how smart their son was. He learned to read quickly and had a particular love for books about animals and the natural world. Emma, meanwhile, was proving to be as headstrong as she was beautiful. She wanted to do everything her big brother did, and she would throw spectacular tantrums when she was told she was too young. Jake had a special soft spot for his daughter, and Sarah would tease him that he spoiled Emma terribly. "She has me wrapped around her little finger," Jake would admit with a sheepish grin. "But how can I say no to that face?" In 1883, Sarah gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Samuel and Benjamin. The pregnancy had been difficult, with Sarah sick for months, and the birth had been long and exhausting. But when it was over and Sarah held both babies, one in each arm, she declared it had been worth every moment of discomfort. Jake looked at his family, his 4 children, and his beautiful wife, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This life they had built together, this family they had created, was everything he had never known he wanted. He thought sometimes about that day in 1876 when he had heard Sarah's cries across the prairie, and he marveled at how one moment, one decision to ride toward trouble instead of away from it, had changed the entire course of his life. The children grew, and the ranch prospered. Jacob proved to have his father's gift with horses, and by the time he was 12, he was already breaking and training colts with a skill that impressed everyone who saw him work. Emma declared she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up, inspired by old Dr. Harrison, and she would follow him around on his house calls whenever he would let her, peppering him with questions. The twins were still young, but they were showing signs of being as bright and energetic as their older siblings. Sarah and Jake's love for each other only grew deeper with time. They still looked at each other across a crowded room and felt that spark, that connection that had been there from the first day. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They still made each other laugh. And they still came together at night with a passion and tenderness that made them both feel cherished and desired. On their 10th wedding anniversary in October of 1886, Jake took Sarah on a trip to Omaha, leaving the children in the capable care of Mrs. Peterson, who had become like a grandmother to them. It was the first time they had been away from the children since they were married, and it felt like a grand adventure. They stayed in a real hotel with a dining room and a ballroom, and Jake bought Sarah a beautiful necklace from a jeweler on the main street. They danced in the hotel ballroom, and Sarah wore a dress she had made especially for the occasion, a deep green silk that made her eyes shine like emeralds. As they swayed together to the music, Jake looked down at his wife and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked, seeing the look on his face. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Jake said. "I am thinking about how different my life would be if I had not ridden over that ridge 10 years ago. I am thinking about how you and Jacob and Emma and Samuel and Benjamin are the best things that ever happened to me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I am the lucky one," she said. "You saved my life, Jake. You saved Jacob's life. And then you gave us a home and a family and a love I never thought I would have. Everything good in my life started the day I heard your voice telling me you were there to help." They kissed there on the dance floor, not caring who saw. And when they pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. That night in their hotel room, they made love with a passion that reminded them both of their wedding night. And Sarah whispered in his ear that she thought maybe they might be starting another baby. Jake just held her close and said that he would welcome as many children as God saw fit to bless them with, as long as Sarah was healthy and happy. Sarah did indeed prove to be pregnant, and in the summer of 1887 she gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Rose after Sarah's mother, who had passed away the previous winter. Rose was a calm, sweet baby who seemed to bring nothing but joy wherever she went. The older children doted on her, especially Emma, who declared that Rose was her baby and spent hours playing with her and helping Sarah care for her. As the 1880s turned into the 1890s, The Morrison family became one of the most respected in the North Platte area. Jake's ranch had grown to over 500 acres and he employed several hands full-time. Sarah's dress shop had expanded to include a line of ready-made clothing for working women, and she had opened a second location in Omaha that was run by one of her former apprentices. Jacob grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's blue eyes and quick mind. When he was 18, he announced that he wanted to go to college to study veterinary medicine. Jake and Sarah were so proud they could barely speak. They had always valued education, and to see their son reach for something beyond the ranch was thrilling. Emma, at 15, was still determined to be a doctor. She was already studying with Dr. Harrison in earnest, and the old doctor had declared that she had more natural talent than many trained physicians he had known. Jake worried about how difficult it would be for a woman to become a doctor, but Emma was nothing if not determined. She had her father's stubbornness and her mother's grace, and Jake had a feeling she would find a way to achieve her dreams. The twins, now 9, were inseparable and constantly getting into mischief. They had their mother's dark hair and their father's green eyes, and they were both sharp as tacks. Sarah said they were going to be lawyers or politicians with the way they could argue and negotiate anything. Jake said they were going to give him gray hair before he was 50. Little Rose, at 4, was the baby of the family and everyone's favorite. She had a sweetness about her that drew people in, and she was already showing signs of having her mother's talent with a needle. She could sit for hours with scraps of fabric, making clothes for her dolls and creating patterns that impressed even Sarah. In 1894, when Sarah was 40 and Jake was 44, they sat on the porch of their ranch house one evening, watching the sun set over the prairie. The children were all inside, the older ones helping the younger ones with homework and chores. From inside, they could hear laughter and the occasional argument, the sounds of a house full of life and love. "Do you ever think about that day?" Sarah asked, her hand in Jake's. "The day you found me on the prairie?" "Every day," Jake admitted. "How could I not? It was the day my real life began." "Mine too," Sarah said softly. "I was so scared that day. I was certain I was going to die, that my baby was going to die, that everything was over, and then I heard your voice. And somehow I knew it was going to be all right. I did not know how, but I knew." "I had no idea what I was doing," Jake confessed with a laugh. "I was terrified. I kept thinking about all the ways it could go wrong, but then I looked at you and I saw how strong you were, how hard you were fighting for your baby, and I knew I could not let you down. I had to be strong for you." Sarah squeezed his hand. "We have been strong for each other," she said. "That is what marriage is, I think. Being strong when the other person cannot be. Being there when you are needed. Loving even when it is hard." "It has never been hard to love you," Jake said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it. "Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to come out, the same stars that had shone down on them that first night when Jake had camped beside Sarah's broken wagon, when they were strangers thrown together by fate. So much had changed since then, but the essential truth remained the same. They loved each other deeply and completely, and they had built a life together that was rich in all the ways that mattered. As the years continued to pass, the Morrison children grew into adults who made their parents proud. Jacob completed his veterinary training and returned to North Platte to open a practice. He married a school teacher named Anna, and they gave Jake and Sarah their first grandchildren, twin girls born in 1898. Emma fought against every obstacle to become a doctor, and in 1899 she graduated from the Women's Medical College in Philadelphia. She returned to Nebraska and opened a practice specifically for women and children, and she quickly became known as one of the best physicians in the state. She never married, declaring that her work was her passion, but she had a full and happy life surrounded by family and friends. The twins, Samuel and Benjamin, went into business together, opening a mercantile in North Platte that became the largest in the region. They married sisters, which everyone found amusing, and between the two couples they produced 6 children who kept everyone entertained with their antics. Rose, the quiet one, surprised everyone by becoming a successful author. She wrote novels about the West, stories of strong women and the men who loved them, and her books were sold all over the country. She married a newspaper editor and moved to Denver, but she visited often and always credited her parents' love story as her inspiration. Jake and Sarah grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never dimming. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1916, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. The celebration was held at the ranch, and people came from all over to honor the couple who had become legendary in the area. Dr. Harrison, now ancient and bent, but still sharp as a tack, stood up to give a toast. "I have known these two for 40 years, Rie," he said, his voice still strong despite his age. "I was there when Jake brought Sarah to my office, when baby Jacob was fighting for his life, when they took their first steps as a family. I have watched them build a life together that is a testament to what love can do. They have raised 5 incredible children who have all gone on to make their marks on the world. They have built businesses and a ranch that employ dozens of families. They have been pillars of this community, always ready to help a neighbor, always generous with their time and resources. But more than any of that, they have shown us all what a true marriage looks like. They have loved each other through good times and bad, through plenty and want, through joy and sorrow. They are an example to us all." Everyone raised their glasses, and Jake and Sarah stood together holding hands, their faces glowing with love and gratitude. Jake cleared his throat and said, "I only want to say one thing. Sarah, you are the love of my life. Everything good that I am, everything good that I have, comes from you. Thank you for saying yes to me all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for every day, every moment, every breath we have shared. I love you more now than I did 40 years ago, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Sarah was crying openly now, and so were half the people gathered. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You saved my life, Jake Morrison, and then you made my life worth saving. You gave me everything I ever wanted and so much more. You are my hero, my partner, my best friend, my love, always and forever." They kissed, and everyone cheered and clapped and cried, and it was a moment that would be talked about for years to come. Jake Morrison passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1921 at the age of 71. He had been working on the ranch the day before, still strong and vital despite his years, and he had gone to bed beside Sarah as he had every night for 44 years. When Sarah woke in the morning, he was gone, a peaceful expression on his face. Sarah was devastated, but she took comfort in knowing that Jake had lived a full and happy life, that he had been surrounded by love until the very end. The funeral was one of the largest North Platte had ever seen, with people coming from all over Nebraska and beyond to pay their respects to a man who had touched so many lives. Sarah lived another 7 years. Surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, she continued to work at her dress shop well into her 70s, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. She talked about Jake every day, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had not known him as well. In the fall of 1928, Sarah passed away quietly in her sleep, much as Jake had. She was 74 years old. Her children found her in her bed, a smile on her face, her hands folded over a worn piece of fabric. When they looked closer, they realized it was Jake's spare shirt, the one he had wrapped baby Jacob in on that first day, the one Sarah had kept all these years as a reminder of where their love story had begun. Sarah was buried beside Jake on a hill overlooking their ranch with a headstone that read, "Sarah Morrison, 1854 to 1928. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She faced the prairie alone and found love in the wilderness." Jake's headstone read, "Jake Morrison, 1850 to 1921. Beloved husband, father, grandfather. He heard her cries and answered. He delivered not just a child, but hope, love, and a future. Their children made sure that the story of how their parents met was passed down through the generations. It became a family legend. The tale of the cowboy who heard a woman's cries on the prairie and stopped to help, who delivered a baby with his own hands, who fell in love and built a life that lasted nearly half a century. The Morrison Ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what Jake and Sarah had built together. The house was expanded and modernized over the years, but the original 3 rooms that Jake had built with his own hands were always preserved, a reminder of humble beginnings and the power of love to transform lives. Years later, Rose Morrison's daughter, named Sarah after her grandmother, wrote a book about her grandparents' love story. It became a bestseller, and people all over America fell in love with the tale of the cowboy and the woman on the prairie. But for the Morrison family, it was not just a story. It was their history, their foundation, the proof that love could bloom even in the harshest circumstances, that one moment of compassion could change everything, that 2 people who were strangers one day could become each other's whole world. The lesson that Jake and Sarah taught their family, the legacy they left behind, was simple but profound. Love is not just a feeling but a choice, made every day in 1,000 small ways. It is showing up when you are needed. It is being strong when your partner is weak. It is building something together, brick by brick, year by year, until you have created a life that is greater than anything you could have achieved alone. And sometimes love begins with a cry in the wilderness and a stranger brave enough to answer. Sometimes it begins with a baby delivered under the open sky, with a man and a woman brought together by chance or fate or providence. Sometimes the greatest love stories start in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes they last forever. The Morrison family never forgot that truth, and they carried it with them through the generations, a reminder that love, real love, is always worth fighting for, always worth believing in, and always, always worth the risk.